I'm going to be called an artist or whatever. I just see art as one big activity. I made this piece at the request of Lady Casson for an exhibition in Jubilee year at the V&A Museum in London. And various people, craftsmen, artists, etc., were asked to make their particular interpretation, celebration, whatever, of the Jubilee that year. And she just said, would I devise something in my vein of working? So I took it as a great opportunity to make something perhaps just a little more light-hearted in the form of some kind of totem pole, whatever, to do with royalty, etc., etc. Obviously the Union Jack's the prime thing we celebrate, and coming down to the caged royals here. All the references are slightly oblique because I wanted it primarily to be a rather decorative object with light-hearted references to things. And then within these little containers there are other references to the Queen, again light-hearted and tongue-in-cheek. And in this one there's a drawing of Concorde. Since I celebrate the building of Concorde, I think that's one of our achievements in the past 25 years, since Her Majesty has been on the throne. The wooden pieces which relate to landscape imagery come basically from a reaction I had against making purely abstract vertical pieces. And I felt it would be nice to take on the challenge of seeing if one could create an abstracted landscape imagery within the terms of the wood and the materials that I use. I may use, for instance, newspaper stuck onto the wood. So that piece of lettering, because it's in reverse, it has an abstract design quality about it, which is actually much more interesting than if you were seeing a letter the right way around or a word the right way around, which might have certain connotations that you don't want. In some of my work, I have used actual words that do have some symbolic meaning or literal meaning in relation to the nature of the piece of work. I remember one thing I made where I deliberately cut portions from a newspaper, and as it was to do with landscape, these letters and so on were names of estate agents, and there were references to natural gas and all sorts of rather peculiar things like that, which you would not notice looking at the thing as an overall structure or composition. I draw landscapes as a break in some ways from being in a workshop the whole time and working solely with wood. It's a nice related activity to go outside the workshop and stand in front of something and make an image of it, interpret it, and so on.
so easy. Anyway, it gets straighter.
Yeah. If you live around here, you have no choice but to take notice of the fact that there are aeroplanes flying over most of the time. And I find them a tremendous visual stimulus. It's tremendously challenging to go and watch them coming off the runway, roaring over your head. I then come away from that and try and make drawings in some way to encapsulate the overall sensation of planes coming in to the ground and off the ground and so on. I'm a great believer in the activity of drawing. And the importance of drawing is that you really have to go out and grapple with what you see in front of you. If, for instance, you're doing a figurative drawing of a tree or whatever, you have to interpret what you see in terms of a pencil and a piece of paper. And every piece of this particular activity, every mark you make, has to relate, has to have its place, and so on. Now, I believe that that, as a fundamental principle, is very important in anything visual, or in anything else for that matter. Because within the making of this particular object, each portion of it has to function in relation to the rest of the object. And if any one portion of it is slack or boring or whatever, then that really fundamentally comes down to bad drawing. If you can't draw what's in front of you, how can you draw what you've got in your head? And most of this comes out of my head. So there's a good reason for being a practicing drawing person. It's just basically a fundamental discipline to do with anything visual. Is the first prerequisite is that you go out and draw. I'm making a clock at the moment, and I'm making it out of deal. This is not primarily a clock. It's basically a piece of sculpture that will hang on the wall, and the clock is an additional element to the piece of sculpture. And the reason I got interested in clocks was that someone suggested I made one for an exhibition about 2 years ago. And I rather like that idea in terms of the pure sculpture I've been doing before that. It would add the extra dimension of a thing ticking within this woodwork, and so bring the thing a different element, bring it to life a little bit as a functional object as well as a piece of decoration for the wall. I'm using deal because in the past deal has been dismissed. If you look in any book on woodworking from, say, the 1920s, they'll talk at great lengths about mahogany, oak, sycamore, any quality hardwood. And if you then turn to a chapter on deal, pine, whatever, this kind of cheap wood, you'll see about 2 sentences which dismiss pine and deal as a carcass wood which was used for instance, for the back of a chest of drawers, as opposed to the main structure. The fact that it's dismissed as a carcass wood, it presents me with a challenge. And it means that you have to do the work yourself to make the pine beautiful, to make this deal beautiful. And I've got involved with colouring, dyeing, and so on, and embellishing pine in whatever ways that I use. So it is up to me personally to make the pine a beautiful wood. The reason I use this black and then scrub it very slightly is that what I'm trying to do is allow the colour of the wood to come through. The black will remain constant, but the colour of the grain will slowly change, as wood does, over a period of time. I'm trying to do 2 things. Make a long vertical statement within which are tiny statements using very small pieces of wood. And I suppose the challenge of working in that way is that you've got to make the 2 things relate to one another. It's a question of enjoying working with really 2 different scales and applying a very small scale to a large scale and seeing how one can solve that problem. I've had a lot of exhibitions since I left college, but to sell anything, as far as my experience goes, is enormously difficult. It's very easy to get a great deal of enthusiasm and the general public wandering in and saying, oh, I haven't seen anything like that before. Isn't that nice, that bit of wood? Doesn't it look good on that wall, etc., etc. But to actually get anyone to fork over some cash for what you've made is another problem altogether.